Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and we are joined by Larken Rose, someone that most people in the anarchist world know. And of course, we are joined as well by Victor Pross, the anarchist artist. Most people on WAM also know who he is. And we're going to have a really interesting discussion today, a civil discussion, talking about open borders versus closed borders. And with that as well, we're going to be talking about the Trump travel ban. And the whole point of this is to get that information out and give slightly conflicting views because, of course, there's going to be disagreements, but there will be agreements, of course, as well, because both of these folks are quite close in ideology. And I think that it's really important for the viewer, those on the fence, those that are anarchists, those that are libertarians, and those that are, hey, conservatives, maybe even liberals watching, though I kind of doubt it. But if we get this information out there to them as well, maybe we can serve to help shift their point of view on these subjects, which are really important. Of course, the Trump travel ban has been all over the media lately, and I'd like to first get the opening statements, and I'll give each 5 minutes, and I think we'll start with Larken Rose. Can you give us your opening statement on why there should be no closed borders and why that is the path to prosperity for, let's say, the entire planet?
Sure. Well, there's two parts there. First of all, closed borders is a euphemism. It's not like there's a door you can close. Closed borders is a euphemism for lots of people with guns using violence to stop anybody from crossing, or to stop people who don't have politicians' permission from crossing the entire massive line that goes around the territorial jurisdiction of a quote-unquote country. So it isn't a matter of do we close the door or do we open the door. It's a matter of do we initiate violence against lots and lots of people for the quote-unquote sin of trying to walk from one piece of dirt to the piece of dirt right next to it, based on some notion that the ruling class in some country has a claim to every square inch of the entire country and gets to say who can and can't set foot there. I think the libertarian position, the non-aggression position, the voluntary position is that borders are inherently, or national borders are inherently bogus, that politicians don't have any rightful claim to the entire country, that nobody has a rightful claim to the entire country, and therefore nobody is justified threatening violence to somebody just for trying to walk across a line. Now, the arguments I usually hear on the other side consist of, well, we have to be realistic. There's always these scary people out there who, some of them are violent and a lot of them are statists, and if they come here and vote and blah, 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 blah. And then they assume that I don't know that or that I disagree with that. The thing is, that's completely irrelevant. Because if you accept the premise that says that, well, because some of this group of people might or will even probably do nasty things, we better initiate violence against all of them. That is the basis of statism. That is always the basis of state. That's the excuse for every authoritarian power there is. Gun control. Well, some of those people with guns might do nasty things, therefore we better have the state violently disarm all of them. It's not a matter of what somebody wants. I don't particularly want a billion people coming in here that speak a different language and have a different culture that I don't know anything about and can't converse with and any of that. But what I want is a completely separate issue from what I have the right to forcibly make happen. And so when people tell me, but it's going to be scary, but it's going to be scary. Okay, the moral position is use force if and only if an individual commits aggression. Don't fall into the statist trap of saying, well, a number of that group is probably going to commit aggression, so we better initiate violence against all of them.
Absolutely. We can't be preemptive with our decision making, especially as free individuals. And you ended quite early there, so we'll pass it on to Victor. What's your statement on this?
Okay, well, yeah, first of all, I do want to make a preliminary statement to my opening statement, and which might sound at first like kind of disconnected from the theme of our conversation, but it isn't really. The possibility of the collapse of Western civilization it's not easy to imagine, and of course the world has never been destroyed by a sudden catastrophe. Man-made catastrophes of that size are not the result of a sudden disaster. It's a long, slow, gradual process which can be observed in advance. And a lot of people in the freedom movement are drawing attention to this, including myself. The erosion and the decline of a culture is at a much deeper level than politics. It goes right to the core of a culture upon which politics rest. Culture, that is my concern. Culture, the philosophical foundations that result and culminate in a society's politics. So it's ideas that concern me here. We see the course of history is determined by the ideas which people choose to adopt. History is replete with ideas come to as essential life in the world. This is a universal truth. The ideas behind any culture, no matter if we're talking about the Western culture, we're talking about Eastern cultures, modern or ancient, the influence of ideas in a culture is universal. Now, here we find, and a lot of people have been talking about it, a lot of other anarchist thinkers, modern culture is a hash of bad ideas coming out from the ivory tower of leftism. Coming out of the universities, we hear little venomous gems like such as reason is impotent to know things as they really are. Certainty is impossible. Knowledge is a mere probability. Mind is a superstition. The materialists. Ethics is a matter of subjective commitment to an arbitrary postulate. And from this, we have the philosophical mutations of modern feminism, third wave feminism, whatever you want to call it, cultural Marxism, social justice warriors, and particularly relevant to this conversation, multiculturalism. And its twin cousin bastard, cultural relativism. And here I'm speaking of the multiculturalism, of course, that stands for a movement that's prominent in the academic humanities departments. The one that's fundamentally an attack on objectivity itself. So multiculturalism, we have to understand this, is a creation. It's a creation of leftist, Western, nihilistic, postmodern philosophy professors, and it begins by promoting cultural relativism, which holds that all cultures are of an equal value. You cannot objectively say one is better than the other. And so far-reaching and embracing are these ideas that even scores of free-thinking and free-market anarchists and libertarians are swept up into the grip of these ideas. So we have the attack. To get more to the issue right now, in the aftermath of the rape attacks in Germany and across Europe, countless examples of crime perpetrated by Middle Eastern refugees have come, is cause for concern. Of course it's a cause for concern. We have to concern ourselves with the rape epidemic in Germany and Sweden. We have to concern ourselves with the fact of cultural incompatibility. It's not just a matter of you like blue and I like purple, you like raspberry, I like grape, whatever. That's not the differences that we're talking about here. We're talking about a fundamental polar opposite clash here in terms of compatibility and respective ideologies. We have, for example, the U.S. takes in immigrants from incompatible and low IQ cultures, while barring Western white high IQ cultures from coming in. This open border policy, as enacted by the state, ironically would earn the applause of some anarchists. And why is that? What's the motive? What's going on? What are the deeper premises that lead to what I consider to be a philosophical error?
Absolutely. Well, well said. I mean, the issue is, I think, along the lines of, can Islam really be compatible with anarchy? And of course, when you look at things like Sharia law, it's hard to envision. But I have a list here of a few facts which are now not only is ISIS blowback, but they were literally armed and funded by the U.S. governments as well as other so-called allies. Nations have been bombed into the ground. The majority of those who died in Iraq alone were children. The state put in no-fly zones in Libya, stole gold reserves, and destroyed any remnants of peace in the countries in the name of so-called peace. And The state destabilized Syria and unleashed ISIS. The state is now attempting to bring in an insane number of refugees in Canada and attempting the same in the United States. Most of these refugees would be put on the welfare, costing the people a fortune as the government steals from them to give to refugees. The crisis in Europe is insane as well, considering women are being raped in the streets. The state is telling little girls not to wear dresses or they're asking to be raped, and people are charged with hate crimes for speaking out against it. Now, with that said, all of these problems were caused by the state in the first place. Then the state attempted to rob individuals and divide them to allegedly make up for the wrongdoings, and now the state is attempting to restrict freedom of movement while mapping out more places to bomb. Larken, Victor, do you see any merit to the concern regarding the refugees, and what is the individualist or voluntarist solution? I'll start with Larken.
Well, the funny thing is, I didn't notice anything that Victor said that I actually disagreed with. What I disagree with is the notion that any of that is at all relevant to the fundamental principles involved and the basis of libertarianism or voluntarism. I totally agree that there are lots of backwards, primitive, violent, stupid cultures around the world, particularly some in the Middle East. I totally agree that a lot of those people don't understand self-ownership. They've been trained, whether religiously or just culturally, to resort to violence, to treat women like property. There's lots and lots of those complaints. I totally agree that when people with that mentality go to other places and cause problems and commit violence, that's bad. What I don't agree is that that makes it justified to use violence against an entire demographic category of people based on what some of them might do. The moral response to some individuals committing rape or assault is to use defensive violence, whatever level of defensive violence it takes to stop those individuals, not to stop anybody who kind of looks like them, or anybody who calls their God by the same name, or anybody who comes from the same country. And if you apply that same reasoning, you could, and I made a post about this recently, you could just as easily argue, hey, most of the violent crime in the US is committed by young men, maybe 18 to 24. Therefore, let's lock up all young men 18 to 24 because it would undoubtedly lower the crime rate. Now, does anybody who believes in voluntarism and non-aggression think that's a good idea? Because that is the equivalent of saying that some of that group is likely to do nasty things, which I don't dispute. Therefore, it's okay to initiate violence against everybody in that group. That is what I dispute.
Well, is there an argument to draw the line between, say, the state coercing individuals by stopping their freedom of movement, and then also at the same time not bringing them in by the boatload and subsidizing them with stolen money from the populace? I mean, shouldn't there be a line drawn in between that to say, look, as anarchists, it's okay for these people to come, obviously. However, it's another story when we are going to be stealing from the American people or the Canadian people or wherever in the world you are, stealing from the people via taxation and then giving these families insane amounts of money each month in order to subsidize their ability to eat and drink and, have shelter. I'll go to Victor.
Yeah, well, the whole question of am I in favor of the government closing the borders or keeping the borders open or whatever, really all that's just it's a misnomer. I don't think that the government can do anything competently. Even if Trump were to avert a disaster as far as migration is concerned, it would not be an endorsement of the state. And if I favor closing the borders, that makes me a statist? I don't think so.
Yes,
I'll make my case. Well, the argument is this: by preventing from people entering the country a geographical slice of land, that is the use of force. And you have people like Lauren Southern, who takes the issue with what she calls hippies and libertarians who proclaim that borders don't exist. She makes a mockery of this, insisting that no, they do exist. But she fails to regard the actual argument, of course. No, they don't exist as a metaphysical quality. granted, of course I realize that they are not axiomatic. They exist entirely as a government edict, which Ms. Southern takes as a metaphysical absolute, but that's a different story. Now, there is a world of difference between open borders and a government actively importing thousands of potentially dangerous refugees into the country, blowing 2 billion tax dollars in the process. Now, we can't take this as some kind of Kantian categorical imperative that open borders is intrinsically good, not within this context. So we can't take this in isolation. If a mass of people enter a certain area and is the cause of a greater amount of force, which it would be, then it is in the interest of ethics and non-aggression that we have to examine this. Okay, there is such a thing as the welfare state that Josh just drew attention to. By narrowing the scope of the issue of placing a border around the country as the only ethical consideration is to make a giant, colossal, possibly lethal logical error. In a situation where there is force, where there's violence, no matter what, closed border, open border, we have to realize that the state is calling the shots on all of this. There is no abstract, intrinsic, purified ethical stance when it comes to an open border, not when it's directed at the behest of the state, and which would logically entail that these refugees would be an enormous burden upon the tax system, by definition, because they are refugees. They're not immigrants coming here of their own volition, hoping to set up tent and to, as a lot of immigrants have in the past, they were attracted to the United States or Canada or whatever because they wanted to start life anew. They accepted the Western canon of the Protestant work ethic, work hard, make your own, stake your own claim in the world, and work hard, earn your own keep, start a family, etc. It's an entirely different ball of wax. That's the context that we have to consider today. Is the state apparatus behind all of this, and not just to take open border as some kind of like unilateral, abstract quality of the good in and of itself.
Okay, Larkin, what do you have to say?
There's a couple things. First of all, I, of course, don't support the welfare state at all. I, of course, don't support government paying to move anybody anywhere. I don't support government paying for anything. It has no rightful claim to anything anywhere at any time. And so when people bring that up, people can bring that up against other statists, but to bring that up against anarchists is sort of silly. I don't know anybody who says, yes, I'm an anarchist and I believe government should steal my money to pay to bring somebody over here. But to say that because there's a welfare state and they're going to come here and take money, therefore, because there's that example of immoral aggression, we need a different example of immoral state aggression over here to make up for that one. That's just adding statism to statism. And to use basically the ends justify the means. Well, if the grand total of aggression would be more if we don't massively initiate violence, then we better massively initiate violence. That's the exact same argument as saying we better lock up all the young men because, hey, it's going to reduce crime. If we don't lock up all the young men, there will definitely be more violent crime. Just look at the statistics. So when you point to the statistics and the examples and all the fear-mongering of, look how scary these people are, even when the fear-mongering is based on reality and factual, it still doesn't justify initiating violence against people. And I like to bring this down to a specific level because, the classic statist thing in everything they do is speak in big, vague, general euphemisms instead of specifically and accurately describing what it is they advocate. So I would ask this. You're standing in the middle of the woods. There are trees all around you. It happens that that tree over there is in Canada, and this tree over here is in Montana or something. And you happen to meet a woman carrying a baby, and she wants to walk across the line. She says, I don't like where I've been. I'd like to come over here. Two questions. One, do you by yourself have the moral right to threaten violence to stop her from walking from tree A to tree B? And the second question, can you delegate that right to somebody else by way of a vote?
Victor?
Yeah, Larkin, of course I'm familiar with these ideas.
That's
Within
not
the
an
within
answer.
the within the appropriate context, private property is a closed border. It all depends. Of course, I'm not going to stop somebody from walking from dirt A to dirt B, and if they homestead and set up tent and all the basis of the locking approach to property rights, of course it would be an out-and-out attack against her rights if I were to stop her. But private property is a closed border. My question to you, so that when you have wave after wave of people who are, as a matter of fact, ideologically at odds with the Western culture and who are pragmatically wedded to the welfare state, how the hell is that going to make a transition to a small government, as according to the libertarian ideal, of course, and let alone the abolishment of the state? This is nothing more than a greater enactment of force, an open border policy amidst a welfare state. We have to look at the entire context. Now, in regards to the non-aggression principle, a lot of people who use the word purist, I think that most people, unfortunately, just have a misunderstanding, not in their disagreement of the non-aggression principle. It's not like a lot of anarchists are fighting for the non-aggression principle and then some other anarchists are fighting against it. I think it's just a misunderstanding of the application of an abstract principle. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's take, we can't take the ethics as some kind of Kantian categorical imperative, as if it was written on a Moses tomb coming down from the bushes. You can't take, let's say, the principle of thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. I mean, people would say, that sounds reasonable to me, but what's the context? What's the context? If your home was invaded, home invaders, the children were, you hid the children away or something, or you hid your diamonds away or cash away, and somebody asked you, okay, where is it, man? Where's the money? And you lied to them. You can't take it some kind of Kantian categorical imperative. Well, lying is wrong. I can't lie. You have to look at the context here, the entire context. So what is true for that micro example is also true for a macro example of there would be a greater degree of the utilization or the utilizing of force with an open border policy among a welfare state. I'm speaking in terms not of ethical relativism, but ethics as an abstract discipline is to be applied to a specific context. And my argument is a greater amount of force would be utilized with an open border policy. Now, once again, I'm not advocating that the government do A or B or C, open border, closed border. All I'm drawing attention to the fact is that this would be a calamitous affair with an come one, come all policy. And if these people come here, they're coming here for a specific reason, and they're going to be enabled by the state, which open border policy or a closed border policy, it's a state paradigm. All of it is force is coming from the four winds, and I'm just saying that it would be absolutely disastrous to the civilizations amidst a statist culture if there was just a come one, come all, open door policy.
A couple things. First of all, the exact same reasoning you just used could be used with the exact same amount of legitimacy to advocate the forced eviction of about 99% of the people in this country who are statists and who believe in forced redistribution of wealth and who vote for it. Now, in a minute, there's a second part, but in a minute I'd love to hear why that wouldn't be okay to say, hey, neighbor, I know you vote Democrat, therefore I'm grabbing my gun and forcibly evicting you from the entire half a continent known as the United States of America, or stopping somebody else from coming in to vote for the exact same reason. The other part is, I can't figure out your position anymore, because your answer about the woman with the baby is absolutely open border, voluntarism. If you don't stop her, by definition, that is open borders. It's the only moral choice. But then you sort of stepped into the abstract and just said, well, I'm just saying this is going to be scary. Well, I don't disagree with that. I just think the moral response to things being scary is not to start initiating violence against a bunch of people who didn't do anything. It's to prepare for and get ready to use defensive violence against actual aggressors, or defensive force. Some people don't like the word violence used when it's defensive. And that's the only moral choice. So now I can't even figure out what your position is, because if you're going to let that lady walk in without a piece of paper that says she has the politician's permission to be here, that's my position. And if you're going to say it might be scary if a bunch of statists come here, well, that's also my position. But that doesn't change the fact that I don't have the right to initiate violence against somebody based on what they look like or where they come from or what their culture is. The only time I have the right to use force is if they actually threaten aggression or commit aggression. So now I can't even figure out what I'm arguing against, because your position on the woman trying to walk across the line between Canada and the U.S. is the open border position.
No. Once again, amidst a statist paradigm, a policy of open border versus closed borders is a false dichotomy. If you have one set of anarchists calling for a closed border, or if you have one set of anarchists applauding an open border, both lead to the enactment of force.
No, they don't.
Now, of course they do. This immigration is a statist program. They're the ones who are calling the shots. We can't look at Larken. If the government is saying come one and come all from the Middle East, and you have scores of imports coming from these low IQ, primitive, backward cultures, that is by the behest and permission of the state. They're calling the shots. Us as anarchists, it's not even as rational people. It's not. We can't go, oh well, there's one less statism example. There's an anarchist principle being put forward. Hey, open borders, at least for those. Maybe the other people have their restrictions, but let's give a big hand of applause to the state for doing something right as far as these open borders are concerned for these low IQ, primitive, backward cultures. They're calling the shots on open or closed borders. It's a statist paradigm. Now, I'm not applauding, and Josh will tell you that I even made when I was debating Walter Block on the whole election of Trump. I took the negative position of boycotting the vote altogether. But if it was the case where Trump were to avert a disaster, I would look at that as a greater good, just in the sense of like between statism A, closing down the child who's opening up a lemonade stand, and let's say statism B of Obama kill list. Yeah, I'm going for the kid whose lemonade stand been shut down as the worst act of aggression. Another thing too is that, as I said before, private property is a closed border. Property rights are null and void under the state. If this weren't the case, all property would be closed borders. As I say, anyone wanting to immigrate to these locations, because in an anarchist society, it would not be global. It would be a certain geographical turf of where the anarchist society and culture would be enacting. But if people want to immigrate to these locations, must do so under the permission of the owner. And that's not acting force, or by the purchase of land from the owner under one's own direction, or by going to a spot of land that was, and they themselves had made it hospitable through homesteading to set up their tent. Here in Canada, all land has been claimed or purchased, has been taken over by the Crown. But if this weren't the case, anyone, anywhere, could claim a part of the land and make it their own. Immigrants used to come to the west for opportunity, because in their country they couldn't buy land. They came to the west because it was more or less, relatively speaking, to various degrees economically free, the freest place on earth. where they could set up a business, become wealthy even. This was the equal opportunity that followed America to become the richest country in the world. So kudos to immigrants as far as that's concerned. That is no longer the case here. That is no longer the case in this context. In this context. Context is what we have to look at. It's about bringing people from the countries the U.S. has bombed and putting them on the welfare at the expense of the public. That is the agenda of this open door policy.
Okay, so basically Okay, go ahead, Larkin.
Wait, two quick things. First of all, when open borders versus closed borders, you're not just comparing apples to oranges, you're comparing an apple to not an apple. Closed border is a euphemism for we're going to have government agents with guns stopping people from crossing the line. Open borders means we're not going to do that. It's an absence of action. It's not a government program. And I saw that title somewhere and thought that's utterly ridiculous to say immigration is a government program. You can say that government-funded immigration is, but letting somebody walk from tree A to tree B is not a government program. It's a lack of violent aggression. And as for the people bring up the private property and try to compare that to national borders, they don't match at all unless you think the politicians own every square inch of the country. I completely agree that the owner of a private property who's homesteaded it or bought it, in a succession from whoever did originally, has the absolute right to decide who gets to set foot there for any reason. It can be it's up to them what the reason is. But to compare that to national borders that not only encompass a massive amount of area that the politicians have no rightful, claim to, but it includes massive amounts of area that nobody has a rightful claim to. Nobody's ever even lived there. And if you drive across the U.S., you'll see a gazillion square miles where nobody is and nobody's ever been. I mean, nobody's ever lived there. And for me to say, for example, okay, in the middle of Wyoming, somebody wants to wander in from Canada and set up shop in the middle of Wyoming, not where somebody else is, but because I was born in eastern Pennsylvania, several thousand miles away, for some reason I have some magic claim and I have some magic ability to tell that person, you don't get to set up shop in that random place in the middle of Wyoming because nations and countries and laws and governments and politics and stuff. That is 100% statist position. And the thing is, I still can't tell what your position is because you also came out and said, yeah, if somebody's homesteading somewhere that's not in use, it sounded like you're okay with that, but that's open border.
Of course.
But that's open borders. The national borders say, here's this line around this quote-unquote country, and we, the ruling class of this quote-unquote country, aren't going to let you in unless you have special pieces of paper.
In a free society, in a free society, of course, that would be an open door policy if somebody were to set up tent via homesteading. I'm saying that in an anarchist society, we're not talking about a global anarchism. We're talking about a certain geographical slice of dirt where that anarchist society would reside and have its own institutions, private property and individual rights institutions and so forth.
So you're talking more hypothetically. You're talking more hypothetically under the private contract that people voluntarily sign into as a voluntary collective rather than the state restricting people's freedom of movement.
And or homesteading on unused land where that individual makes it hospitable. That's fine. Any society, this geographical slice, has a specific philosophy behind it. Okay. There would be any people attracted to that given geographical slice would come of their own volition. And of course, an open door policy away, open door policy. But we're not talking about this anarchist society. I'm talking about within the context of a statist paradigm in place. Now, once again, the government is calling the shots on all of this, open or closed door policy. If they have an open door policy, again, you can't take that as some kind of Kantian categorical imperative that, hey, that's good. Bring in those Muslims from the backward countries who are hostile to the country. They're coming for the free goodies, but they're completely ideologically at odds with the Western canon. And that's going to lead to a disaster. I mean, it's not theoretical. It's happening. It's happening in the world. We don't, and you don't have to be some kind of mind-reading Minority Report to predict the outcome as borne by the stats of what's taking place in Europe. A greater amount of force is going. If we're concerned about force here, if we're concerned about force, I think the force that we should be concerned with is the disaster that importing and by just the people in the boatloads who are coming across for the free goodies. In part, it's going to be disaster because there is a statist paradigm, there is a welfare state, and the West is suffering from what can be called pathological altruism. Now, open door policy is not this is not the government respecting and upholding rights. They're doing it by its privilege. The underlining philosophical underpinnings here is privilege. We're calling the shots. We'll decide when to close and open the doors. This is not by right. This is by decree.
Okay, let me just throw something in there real quick, guys. I recently spoke with Eric July of the band Backwards, and he proved an interesting point when it comes to immigration free of the state. Say there were some bad people that wanted to come in. Imagine for a second that everyone was freely able to arm themselves. Now, you'd have to be pretty crazy to walk into an armed community and conspire to do something bad to the individual. And we're talking away from, the state subsidizing people from other places and saying, oh yeah, come in, you can live for free. And of course, a lot of them are well-off businessmen from places like Syria and so on. And then, of course, they leave their kids behind, they leave the women behind, and they leave the weakest behind, the ones that are facing the biggest struggles, then come in and get subsidized by the taxpayer. We're talking a different situation from this completely, where we're in a hypothetical anarchist society where individuals arm themselves, aren't restricted from their ability to defend themselves, and then people come in, whether we're talking refugees or people from Mexico, where if you took away all these regulations that have killed all these jobs and killed small businesses and propped up other major industries by the favoring of the state, there'd be jobs for everyone, and then some. There'd be a lot more competition and innovation, and then people would be able to defend themselves and homestead and do their own thing outside of any state coercion.
Yeah, the thing is, when you keep jumping back and forth to saying, well, here's the ideal anarchist society, but here's what we have now. But it sounds like you're advocating state violence because we already have state violence. I mean, it would be the equivalent of saying, well, there's lots of gang violence because of the war on drugs, so until we repeal the war on drugs, we better have gun control. Like, we better have this pile of violent aggression as long as we have that pile of violent aggression. And one, that's never moral. And two, you're still making the exact same argument that would apply to young males, to locking them all up. It is indisputable that the violent crime rate would be way lower if all the young males were locked up. And it would be totally immoral to do that. It's still a matter, and I'm getting less and less clear on what your position is, because you talk about, well, this is ideally what we want. Well, aren't we advocating ideally what we want? Because it sounds like you're saying, we don't have a free society, therefore I'm not going to advocate a free society. We have statism, therefore I'm going to advocate state violence. That's why we have statism, because people believe in the notion of the common good, and, well, overall, people will be better served by having this massive aggression, which is what you just argued, that overall there would be less violence if we have this massive state violence to keep these people from coming in, therefore it's okay. That's the excuse. I mean, what's the William Pitt quote? Necessity is the excuse for every infringement of human freedom. It's the plea of tyrants. It's the creed of slaves. It is always the excuse for statism, and you're making the exact same argument that every statist always makes for every single piece of authoritarian power they want.
I am not coming from the position of a small government libertarian. I am an anarchist. I said from the outside of my talk that I do not have any faith in the government doing anything competently, whether it's open door or closed door policy.
But the closed borders means, what those words mean is state agents using state violence to enforce state laws about state borders. How can you pretend that isn't statist? We're not talking about people on their private property saying you can't come here. We're talking about the quote-unquote border around a nation. What that means is the territorial jurisdiction of a ruling class.
An open door policy. I'm repeating myself. An open door policy amongst the statist paradigm is a state program as well.
That's a lie.
Coming
that
from all the four winds.
Utterly false. I completely agree that the reason some politicians want immigrants coming in is because they think, well, they'll vote Democrat and vote for a bigger welfare state. But to not initiate violence against somebody, to not threaten the woman with the baby with violence, that's not a government policy. That's refraining from committing aggression.
These issues become kind of blurry and foggy because we're all, each of us on a political level and the macro level, considering this question, are committed to our positions. That's very laudable. I understand that. Let me remove the context and put it into a macro or a micro situation right here in your own life. If somebody were to invade your home and you have your friend, your wife, whoever, somebody close to you, they threaten violence against that person or asked you as to where their whereabouts and they're hiding somewhere in the house under a floorboard or whatever. Are you going to take the ethical position, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not kill, as an absolute? Of course not.
No, because they're the aggressor. That's not an act of aggression to lie to an armed invader.
Politicians calling the shots on an open or border policy are exerting violence. When they have an open door policy...
Utterly false. Utterly 100% false. Not threatening the woman trying to walk across the line is not an act of violence. It's insane.
I've made that clear. In a free society, that would be the case.
But now it's an act of violence to not threaten the woman walking from tree A to tree B. Really? That's an act of violence. That's what you're arguing, and it's insane.
I am not arguing that.
You just said open borders.
I prefaced all my commentary. I premised all my commentary within a specific context. In the context of somebody invading my home, I would kill them in self-defense. I would lie.
Utterly irrelevant to national borders.
And I'm not calling for the government to do jack shit. Don't put the moral blame on me. No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
How do you close a national border without government agents? Describe how we have a closed border without government agents exerting violence.
Of course it would be. And an open door policy leads to even worse statist results. And the fact that it does lead to statist results.
Ends justify the means. Common good. The argument for every bit of statism.
I am throwing my entire philosophical weight, as I've been an activist for the last 10 years, towards a free society. Not to argue on minute derivative issues such as open or closed borders. I am calling for a free society. Until such free, as I've made clear in a free society, come one, come all, to that geographical slice that is the anarchist utopia, if you want to put it in those words. Come one, come all. Come one, come all. In a statist paradigm where the government calls the shots of how many people and what people, that is a government decree that I have no control over. And I'm not to be ethically accountable for a closed border when it comes to the Muslim migration issue. Yeah, I can hope for it, but I'm not politically active in that area, though.
But you're comparing an apple to not an apple. The government can make one decree that says if you have this plant and we catch you with it, we'll throw you in a cage. And they can make another decree that says if we catch you with this plant, we won't do anything to you. The second one is not violence. The first one is. A government saying, we're not going to send men with guns after you if you step from tree A to tree B. That is not an act of violence. You can say it's a government decree, but it's them decreeing something they're not going to do. There's a big difference between I'm not going to use violence against you and I am going to use violence against you, and you're pretending those are the same thing.
Okay, without this falling into becoming circular, let me ask you, do you advocate a complete abolishment amongst what's happening in Europe, with the fact that we are speaking in the context of a welfare state and under these backward primitives, would you welcome a unilateral open door policy, hands off, come one, come all, and when you are here, we'll make sure we'll tend to your comforts at the expense of the taxpayer? That's what that means.
No, it
That's
doesn't.
what that
And
means.
you were almost honest till the very end.
In a statist paradigm, the migration, the cause, the motive for it is precisely to get the free goodies.
For some of them, and for a lot of them. So
now, with a statist paradigm, that's the context.
You're still making the argument that because some of these people might, or even probably, will either do nasty things or receive stolen loot, we get to initiate violence against the entire category. And that's the basis for gun control. Every single one. You really want to pretend that every single one crossing that line.
In a statist paradigm, yeah, with this migration influx, there would be a greater amount of force exercise. It's damned if you do it, damned if you don't. Force is that coming from the four winds.
That's not what I asked. You don't get to initiate violence against categories of people based on what a bunch of them might do, or even what a bunch of them almost certainly will do.
I am not calling for the state. I am not calling for the state to do one thing or another. I'm throwing all of my philosophical weight towards a free society. I can hope that they would not permit this open door policy within the context of speaking of primitive, backward Islamic fascists.
To hope they don't permit an open policy is to advocate that they use violence to keep people out. Those are the two options.
I advocate that the home invader be killed at the hands of the homeowner. Yes.
Me too. You don't own a continent. You own your house. If somebody breaks into your house, shoot him. If somebody steps from tree A to tree B, from Canada to Montana, don't shoot him.
But I made it clear in the context of an anarchist society, come one, come all. I'm talking about the context here. I gave the context of the home invasion, didn't I?
Yeah, and that analogy is completely worthless and inappropriate. Because you own your house, you don't own half a continent. You don't get to decide who steps from this piece of woods to that piece of woods in the middle of freaking nowhere. But that's what closed border says.
I know. I'm a peon citizen. Of course I don't get to call the shots. I'm not calling the shots on this.
But I can only hope somebody else do it. To advocate that somebody else with a gun stop that woman from going to tree A to tree B is also immoral. And I can't figure out whether
take your case to Lauren Southern. Take your case to Lauren Southern on that. I'm not advocating that either. I'm just drawing attention to the facts. With this open door policy, especially where it's concerned with the low IQ, primitive, backward cultures, it's going to lead to a catastrophe.
If that was your entire
that we see engulfing Europe right now.
If that was your entire position, I wouldn't even argue with you. If your position was, a bunch of people are headed this way, a lot of them are probably going to be violent and they're going to vote Democrat, we better be careful, I totally agree.
But you're not arguing for the small government libertarian here.
I can't figure out what I'm arguing with because you've changed your position about 20 times so far. If your position is, here come some people who may be violent, maybe, they may vote Democrat, blah, blah, blah. Better have government agents forcibly keep them all out. That is statism. And that is the definition of advocating.
No. Here, I'll give you statism. The UN Agenda 2030 and the UN World Population Revision 2015 clearly state that migration from developing nations into Western nations is expected to be roughly 2.6 million people per year, every year for the next 34 years, and that the population increases in Western nations over this period will be 80% due to immigration. This is the state calling the shots on all this.
And therefore what? Therefore we suddenly get to initiate violence against huge categories of people? Again, there's a massive difference. There's a massive difference here that closed border people almost never talk about, including the ones who say they're anarchists. There is what I want, and there is what I get to make happen by way of force, whether on my own or by way of government. I don't want 1 billion people to come here who have a totally different culture, and I can't speak with them, and they're more statist. but I don't have the right, by myself or by way of government, to use violence to stop everybody from stepping across that arbitrary line.
Do you agree that it doesn't call? Do you agree that this doesn't call for some kind of mind-reading minority report to know that there would be disasters?
I agree.
They can be predicted in advance.
I agree.
They can be predicted in advance.
Just like it could absolutely be predicted that not locking up all the young men is going to result in a higher violent crime rate. It's going to, obviously, indisputably. You can look at the fact. We better lock up all the young men. No. The young men with the stats on the young men, they have volition. They can make their choices. Of course, there's a lot of people. Muslims don't have volition. Foreigners don't have volition.
No, of course they have volition. No, Larken. I am an advocate of free will. Of course, the Western nations, the Western nations will pay for the support of these immigrants who are refugees. The reason why is that they would have to be held up by a welfare state is because they're refugees. So it's not a minority thing here. They have few employable skills. A great portion of them, I don't know what the stats are, but all that can be provided. If you want to link that, I can provide it for you, Josh. But a great portion of those refugees are illiterate, even in their own language. They're ignorant of law and order under the Western canon, rather. And of course, we're talking about the law and order that you and I would advocate, Larken, non-aggression. Completely ignorant of this, or belie it. And because of their low working skills and low IQ, if they're being imported at the behest, opening the doors, of course it's going to lead to aggression, not physical aggression, and also via the welfare state as well. You cannot, in a statist paradigm, you cannot separate these two things: migration, statist paradigm, welfare state. A culture that's completely not different, not vanilla versus chocolate. Completely antithetical to the Western canon. This is a recipe for disaster. And I'm not calling for the government to do anything. All I can hope for.
You keep saying that while advocating closed borders, which doesn't make sense. Those two do not.
I'm not advocating closed borders. You keep on putting that on me. I'm just recognizing the facts.
I don't think you know what you're advocating.
Okay, gentlemen. I think since we've gone a little bit over time and we might have gotten a little repetitive, I think it would be a good time to close it off. Of course, the two of them will not completely see eye to eye, but that's left up to the viewer to watch and make your own decisions about what you believe. And I have to thank both Larken Rose and Victor Pross for joining us today. It's been definitely an interesting, fiery debate today, and I'm sure the viewer will have learned a little something from either side. So I thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Larken.
Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out with Victor Pross and Larken Rose from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.